The blood on Lorelei Winters' hands had long since washed away in the creek, 3 miles south of Winnetka, California. But the memory remained as vivid as the desert sunset painting the sky crimson above the dusty town. It was late summer in 1878, and she had arrived on the afternoon stage with nothing but a worn leather satchel, a false smile, and a secret that threatened to consume her from the inside out. Winnetka sat at the edge of the Mojave Desert, a place where ranchers and miners mixed uneasily with those running from their pasts. The town had grown quickly after gold was discovered in the nearby hills 5 years prior, though most of the easy pickings were long gone. What remained were hardworking people trying to carve out honest lives, and others who preyed upon them. Lorelei hoped to disappear among them, to become just another face in a town where people asked few questions. She stepped off the stage in front of the general store, her dark hair twisted into a practical bun beneath a plain gray bonnet. At 22 years old, she had already lived what felt like several lifetimes, each one more painful than the last. The California heat pressed against her skin like a physical weight, so different from the cool Oregon mornings she had left behind along with everything else. "You need help with your bag, miss." The stage driver had kind eyes, weathered like old leather from years under the sun. "No, thank you. I can manage." Her voice came out steady despite the trembling in her chest. She had practiced being steady, practiced being unremarkable. It was the only way to survive. The driver tipped his hat and climbed back onto his seat, calling to his horses. Within moments, the stage rolled away in a cloud of dust, leaving Lorelei standing alone on the wooden sidewalk. Around her, Winnetka bustled with late afternoon activity. Men on horseback rode past, their spurs jingling. Women in simple calico dresses hurried between shops, baskets on their arms. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Lorelei gripped her satchel tighter and walked toward the boarding house she had spotted at the end of the main street. The sign hanging above the door read, "Widow Morrison's Respectable Lodging for Ladies." It was exactly the kind of place she needed, somewhere proper and unremarkable. The inside was dim and mercifully cool. A tall, thin woman with graying hair looked up from behind a desk, her spectacles sliding down her nose. "Can I help you? I am looking for a room. My name is Lorelei Winters. I have just arrived from the north, and I am seeking employment in town." The widow studied her with the sharp eyes of someone who had seen her share of drifters and desperate souls. "You running from something, Miss Winters?" The question struck like a physical blow, but Lorelei kept her expression neutral. "No, madam, just looking for a fresh start. I have money for 2 weeks' rent and references from my previous employer." The references were forged, but they looked authentic enough. After a long moment, Widow Morrison nodded. "I have a room on the 2nd floor. Meals are served at 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening. No men allowed upstairs. No drinking, and church attendance on Sundays is expected." "That sounds perfect." Lorelei counted out the coins, her hands steady now. This was familiar territory, this transaction of money and lodging. It felt safe, normal. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Lorelei set down her satchel and sank onto the bed, allowing herself a moment of weakness now that she was alone. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her face. The journey from Oregon had taken 3 weeks, 3 weeks of looking over her shoulder, of jumping at every unexpected sound, of wondering if someone had discovered what she had done. She could still see his face, contorted with rage and alcohol. Could still feel his hands around her throat, squeezing the life from her. Could still remember the desperate grab for the fireplace poker, the sickening sound it made when it connected with his skull. Her husband of 6 months, the man who had seemed so charming during their brief courtship, had revealed himself to be a monster the moment they were alone together. For half a year, she had endured his violence, hidden her bruises beneath long sleeves and high collars, and told lies about accidents and clumsiness. That final night, he had come home drunk and furious about a poker game gone wrong. He had beaten her worse than ever before, and when she tried to flee, he had grabbed her throat and told her he was going to kill her. She had fought back with every ounce of strength she possessed, and when he finally fell, blood pooling beneath his head on their cabin floor, she had known her life as Lorelei Hayes was over. No one would believe it was self-defense. She was a woman, small and educated, while he was a respected timber manager. His friends would hang her without a trial, so she had taken what money she could find, packed a single bag, and disappeared into the night. 3 weeks of traveling, of changing her surname from Hayes to her mother's maiden name of Winters, of crafting a new history for herself. 3 weeks of carrying the weight of what she had done. Lorelei stood and smoothed her skirt. She could not afford to dwell on the past. She had to focus on building a new life here in Winnetka, on becoming someone else entirely. Tomorrow she would look for work. Tonight she would rest and try to forget the blood on her hands. The next morning, Lorelei presented herself at the general store, the saloon, and the hotel, asking about employment. By afternoon, she had secured a position at the Golden Eagle Hotel as a housekeeper. The pay was modest but steady, and the hotel manager, a portly man named Mr. Chen who had immigrated from China a decade earlier, asked few questions about her past. "You start tomorrow at dawn," he told her in accented but clear English. "Work is hard but honest. You keep rooms clean, you help in kitchen when needed. You do good work, you keep job." "Thank you, Mr. Chen. I will not disappoint you." She left the hotel feeling lighter than she had in weeks. A job meant stability, meant the ability to blend into the fabric of this town. She was walking back toward the boarding house when she collided with something solid and warm. Strong hands caught her elbows, steadying her. "Whoa there, madam. You all right?" Lorelei looked up into a pair of startling blue eyes set in a sun-bronzed face. The man who had caught her was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat. He wore the practical clothing of a working rancher, dusty denim and a faded blue shirt, and a Colt revolver sat on his hip. But it was his face that caught her attention, the strong jaw and the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his mouth curved into a concerned half-smile. "I am fine, thank you. I should have been watching where I was going." She stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they stood. "No harm done." He released her arms but did not move away. "I do not believe I have seen you around Winnetka before, just passing through. Actually, I have just moved here. I am staying at Widow Morrison's." His smile widened. "Well then, welcome to town. I am Ryan Jacoby. My family owns the Double J Ranch about 5 miles west of here." Lorelei Winters. She did not extend her hand, did not want to encourage further conversation. Getting close to people meant questions, and questions meant danger, but Ryan Jacoby did not seem deterred by her reserve. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Miss Winters. If you need anything, if anyone gives you trouble, the Double J is always willing to help a neighbor." "That is kind of you." She glanced past him toward the boarding house. "If you will excuse me, I should be going." "Of course." He stepped aside, tipping his hat. "I hope to see you around town, Miss Winters." Lorelei nodded and hurried away, her heart beating faster than it should. She could not afford to notice how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, or how his hands had been gentle when they steadied her. She could not afford to notice any man, not when her dead husband's body might be discovered at any moment, not when she was living a lie. The first few weeks in Winnetka passed in a blur of hard work and careful anonymity. Lorelei kept her head down at the hotel, scrubbing floors and changing linens with efficient thoroughness. She spoke little to the other staff, deflecting personal questions with vague answers and redirected conversation. She attended church on Sundays as required, sitting in the back and leaving immediately after the service ended. But Winnetka was a small town, and true anonymity was impossible. People began to nod to her on the street to ask how she was settling in. Widow Morrison proved to be less stern than her initial impression suggested, often inviting Lorelei to join her for tea in the boarding house parlor. And Ryan Jacoby seemed to appear everywhere she went. She would see him at the general store, buying supplies for the ranch. He would tip his hat and ask how her day was going. She would see him outside the saloon, talking with other ranchers, and he would excuse himself to walk over and greet her. She would see him riding through town, and he would slow his horse to match her pace along the sidewalk, making casual conversation about the weather or the upcoming harvest festival. It was disconcerting and dangerous, and if she was honest with herself, a little bit wonderful. Because Ryan Jacoby was not like her husband had been. There was no darkness in his eyes, no barely controlled violence simmering beneath his friendly exterior. He was genuine in a way that seemed almost foreign to her, asking about her opinions on things, listening when she spoke, treating her with a respect she had almost forgotten was possible. "You are avoiding him," Widow Morrison observed one evening over tea. The older woman had a way of seeing straight through Lorelei's careful defenses. "I do not know what you mean, Ryan Jacoby. That boy has been sweet on you since the day you arrived, and you treat him like he has got smallpox. He is a good man, Lorelei, one of the best in this town." Lorelei stared into her teacup. "I am sure he is, but I am not looking for companionship." Widow Morrison sipped her tea. "You know, I came to Winnetka 15 years ago after my husband died. I thought I would just exist here, just get through each day. But life has a way of surprising you, of offering second chances when you least expect them." "Some pasts are too heavy for second chances," Lorelei said softly. The widow reached across the table and patted her hand. "Whatever you are running from, child, it does not define you. What you do here, who you become here, that is what matters." Lorelei wanted to believe her, but she knew the truth was more complicated than that. She had taken a life, regardless of the circumstances. That was not something that could be outrun or forgotten. September brought cooler temperatures and the harvest festival Lorelei had heard so much about. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which took place in a large clearing at the edge of Winnetka. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by dozens of families. A makeshift stage had been erected for musicians, and children ran wild between the adults, shrieking with laughter. Lorelei had planned to make a brief appearance and then return to the boarding house. She was standing near the food tables, watching the festivities with detached interest when Ryan appeared at her elbow. "Evening, Miss Winters. I was hoping you would be here." She turned, preparing to make her excuses, but the words died in her throat. He looked different tonight, cleaned up and wearing a white shirt instead of his usual work clothes. His hair was still damp from a recent washing, and he smelled faintly of soap and leather. "Mr. Jacoby, I was just about to leave, actually. Already. The dancing has not even started yet." He gestured toward the stage where the musicians were tuning their instruments. "I was hoping you might let me claim one dance before you go." "I do not dance." It was a lie. She had loved dancing once before her marriage had destroyed that simple joy. "Neither do I, usually. But I am willing to embarrass myself if it means spending a few minutes with you." His smile was self-deprecating, charming without trying to be. Lorelei knew she should refuse, should maintain her distance, her walls, but something in his earnest expression made her hesitate. It would be rude to refuse such a simple request, she told herself, and one dance would not hurt anything. All right, one dance. His face lit up with such genuine pleasure that she felt something crack in the armor around her heart. He offered his arm and led her toward the clearing that had been designated as the dance floor. Other couples were already gathering as the musicians launched into a lively tune. Ryan's hand settled on her waist, warm through the fabric of her dress. She placed her hand on his shoulder, suddenly nervous. It had been so long since she had been this close to a man, and the memories that threatened to surface were dark ones. But as they began to move to the music, she realized that this was nothing like her husband's grip. Ryan held her gently, as though she were something precious, and he guided her through the steps with surprising grace for someone who claimed not to dance. "You are pretty good for someone who does not dance," she observed. He grinned. "My mother insisted all her children learn. She said it was part of being civilized, even out here in the wilderness. You have siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, all younger. I am the oldest, which means I got stuck with the most responsibility when my father passed away 3 years ago. I am sorry for your loss." The words were automatic, but she meant them. She could see the shadow that crossed his face at the mention of his father. "Thank you. It was hard, but we managed. The ranch is doing well now. My brothers help run the cattle operation, and my sister is engaged to the blacksmith's son." He spun her gently, and she found herself laughing at the unexpected movement. The sound surprised her. When was the last time she had laughed? "What about you, Miss Winters? Do you have family?" The question sobered her instantly. "No, no family." Ryan must have sensed the pain behind those words because he did not press further. Instead, he said, "Well, Winnetka has a way of becoming family to those who need it. This town took in my mother when she was a young widow with 4 children to feed. People here look out for each other." They continued to dance as the song flowed into another, and Lorelei found herself relaxing into the rhythm, into the warmth of his presence. For just a few moments, she allowed herself to forget about Oregon, about her dead husband, about the lies she carried. For just a few moments, she was simply a young woman dancing with a kind man under the stars. But the moment could not last forever. As the second song ended, she stepped back, suddenly aware of how many people were watching them. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Jacoby. I really should be going now. Ryan, please call me Ryan." His hand lingered on her waist for just a second longer before he released her. "And thank you, Miss Winters. This was the best part of my evening." She did not trust herself to respond, so she simply nodded and hurried away through the crowd. Behind her, she could feel his eyes following her retreat. That night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Lorelei stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about how safe she had felt in Ryan's arms. Tried not to think about his smile, or the way he had listened when she spoke, or the gentleness in his touch. Because thinking about those things led to dangerous places, to the possibility of hope, and hope was a luxury she could not afford. But despite her best efforts, she dreamed of dancing under the stars, and when she woke in the morning, she carried the warmth of that dream with her into the day. October arrived with cooler mornings and the threat of winter in the distant mountains. Lorelei had settled into a routine at the hotel, and Mr. Chen had even given her a small raise for her diligent work. She had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life here. That Oregon was far enough away, that enough time had passed. She was cleaning a room on the second floor of the hotel one afternoon when she heard raised voices downstairs. Curious and slightly concerned, she set down her cleaning supplies and moved to the top of the stairs. In the lobby below, She could see Mr. Chen speaking with a man she did not recognize. The stranger wore a marshal's badge and carried himself with the rigid authority of the law. "I am telling you, she has not been here," Mr. Chen was saying, his accent thicker than usual in his agitation. "I have reason to believe she might have passed through this area. A young woman, dark hair, traveling alone. She is wanted for murder in Oregon." Lorelei's blood turned to ice. Her hands gripped the railing so hard her knuckles went white. They had found her. Somehow, they had tracked her across 3 states and hundreds of miles. Many young women pass through Winnetka. This is a growing town. Mr. Chen's voice was calm but firm. The marshal pulled out a piece of paper from his coat. "Her name is Lorelei Hayes, though she might be using a false name. Her husband was found dead in their home 3 months ago. Witnesses say she disappeared the same night." "I am sorry, Marshal, but I cannot help you. I know of no one matching that description." Lorelei could not breathe. She had to move, had to run, but her legs would not cooperate. She watched as the marshal thanked Mr. Chen with obvious skepticism and left the hotel. Only when the door closed behind him did she allow herself to sag against the wall. Mr. Chen looked up and their eyes met across the distance. He said nothing, but his expression told her everything. He knew. He had known, or at least suspected, and he had lied to protect her. She did not go back to finish cleaning the room. Instead, she gathered her things and fled to the boarding house, her mind racing. She had to leave Winnetka tonight. Before the marshal questioned more people, before someone connected Lorelei Winters with Lorelei Hayes, before everything she had built here came crashing down. In her room, she pulled out her satchel and began throwing her few possessions into it. Her hands shook so badly she could barely fasten the buckles. Where would she go? Further south into Mexico, east toward Texas. It did not matter, anywhere but here. Going somewhere. Lorelei spun around to find Widow Morrison standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I have to leave. There are circumstances that require my immediate departure." "The marshal, you mean? The one asking questions about a woman wanted for murder?" The widow stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "I saw him on the street earlier, heard him talking to Sheriff Barnes." Lorelei sank onto the bed, her satchel clutched to her chest. "I did not have a choice. He was going to kill me. I fought back and he died. But no one will believe that. They will hang me without even listening." To her surprise, Widow Morrison sat down beside her and put an arm around her shoulders. "Tell me what happened, child, all of it." And so Lorelei did. The words poured out of her in a desperate rush, the entire horrible story of her marriage, the escalating violence, that final terrible night. She told the widow things she had never spoken aloud, about the fear that had consumed her every day, about the bruises and the broken ribs and the constant terror, about the moment when her husband's hands had closed around her throat, and she had known with absolute certainty that if she did not fight back, she would die. When she finished, tears were streaming down her face. Widow Morrison held her while she sobbed, rocking her gently like a child. "You listen to me, Lorelei Winters. What you did was not murder, it was survival. Any person in that situation would have done the same. But the law does not see it that way. I am a woman and he was my husband. They will say I should have been more obedient, should have tried harder to please him. They will blame me for his violence. Not everyone will." The widow's voice was firm. "There are good people in this town who understand that sometimes the law is wrong, but running again is not the answer. You cannot spend your whole life fleeing. What else can I do? If I stay, they will arrest me. They will take me back to Oregon to hang. Not if people here speak for you. Not if you have folks willing to stand up and say you deserve a fair hearing." Widow Morrison squeezed her shoulder. "Let me talk to some people, see what can be done. In the meantime, you stay put. Do not run. Running makes you look guilty. I am guilty. I killed him. You survived him. There is a difference. The widow stood. I am going to talk to Sheriff Barnes. He is a fair man, and he has seen enough of the world to know that things are not always black and white. Trust me, Lorelei. After she left, Lorelei sat alone in her room, paralyzed by indecision. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear before anyone else could put the pieces together. But another part of her, a part that had been born here in Winnetka over the past 2 months, wanted to stay. Wanted to believe that maybe, just this once, the truth would be enough. She was still sitting there when she heard a knock at her door. Thinking it was the widow returning, she opened it without checking. But instead of Widow Morrison, Ryan Jacoby stood in the hallway, his hat in his hands and concern written across his face. Lorelei, I heard there was a marshal in town asking questions. Widow Morrison sent word to the ranch that you might be in trouble. Can I come in? She should have said no. Should have maintained propriety, should have kept her distance. But the walls she had built so carefully were crumbling, and she was too tired to hold them up anymore. She stepped aside and let him enter. Ryan closed the door behind him and turned to face her. Tell me what is happening. Let me help. You cannot help. No one can. But even as she said the words, she felt herself breaking. The weight of the secret she had carried alone for so long was crushing her, and suddenly she wanted nothing more than to share that burden with someone else, with him. Try me. He moved closer, his blue eyes searching her face. Whatever it is, you do not have to face it alone. And so, for the second time that day, Lorelei told her story. But this time, she included everything. She told Ryan about meeting her husband at a church social in Portland, about how charming he had seemed during their courtship, about the wedding that had felt like a dream coming true, and the honeymoon that had become a nightmare. She told him about the first time her husband had hit her, how shocked she had been, how he had apologized and promised it would never happen again. About how the violence had escalated over the months, becoming more frequent and more severe. About how she had been too ashamed to tell anyone, too afraid of being blamed or not believed. She told him about that final night, about her husband coming home drunk and furious, about the beating that had been worse than all the others combined, about his hands around her throat, squeezing, while the world went dark at the edges, about grabbing the fireplace poker in a last desperate attempt to survive, about the sickening crack of iron against bone, about her husband falling, the sudden absence of his hands on her throat, the gasping breaths as air flooded back into her lungs. She told him about the blood on the cabin floor, spreading in a dark pool beneath her husband's head, about checking for a pulse and finding none, about the panic that had seized her, the knowledge that no one would believe she had acted in self-defense, about packing a bag and running, about traveling for 3 weeks to reach California, about creating a new identity and trying to become someone else. By the time she finished, she was shaking. Ryan had not moved, had not interrupted, had simply listened with an intensity that made her feel truly seen for the first time in her life. I am a murderer, she whispered. I took a life. It does not matter what the circumstances were. I killed him and I ran, and now the law has caught up with me. I should never have stopped here. I should have kept running. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and very gently pulled her into his arms. She stiffened at first, instinct making her want to fight or flee. But his embrace was nothing like her husband's touch. It was warm and solid and safe, and after a moment she allowed herself to lean into it. You are not a murderer, he said quietly, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear. You are a survivor. What you did took courage that most people will never understand. You saved your own life, Lorelei. There is no shame in that. The law does not see it that way. Then the law is wrong. He pulled back just enough to look down at her, his hands on her shoulders. Listen to me. You are not going to run and you are not going to hang. We are going to fight this, together. You do not understand what you are saying. If you help me, you could be accused of harboring a fugitive. You could lose everything. I understand perfectly. His eyes held hers, steady and sure. And I do not care. You matter more than any of that. Why? You barely know me. Ryan's hand came up to cup her cheek, his calloused thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized she had shed. I know you well enough to see the person you truly are, kind, hardworking, brave. I have seen how you treat people, how you carry yourself with dignity even when I can tell you are carrying a heavy burden. I have watched you over these past 2 months, Lorelei, and I have come to care for you more than I ever thought possible. Her breath caught. Ryan. I know the timing is terrible. I know you have got more important things to worry about right now, but I need you to know that you are not alone in this. Whatever happens, I am going to stand by you. I promise. Something inside Lorelei cracked wide open. The walls she had built, the armor she had worn for so long, all of it came tumbling down in the face of his unwavering support. She had been so certain that no one would understand, that no one would believe her, that she would have to face the consequences of her survival alone. But here was Ryan, offering not just belief but protection, not just understanding but devotion. I do not deserve your help, she whispered. I do not deserve your kindness. You deserve so much more than you think you do. He pulled her close again, and this time she went willingly, wrapping her arms around his waist and holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand. Now you are going to tell me everything the marshal said, and then we are going to make a plan. Because you are not going back to Oregon, and you are sure as hell not going to hang for defending yourself. They sat together on the bed, proper distance maintained despite the intimacy of their conversation, and Lorelei recounted everything she had overheard at the hotel. Ryan listened carefully, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. The marshal does not have enough to arrest you yet. If he did, he would already have done it. He is fishing, trying to find someone who matches the description. As long as no one directly identifies you as Lorelei Hayes, he cannot prove anything. But he will keep asking questions. Eventually someone will make the connection, maybe. But here is what we are going to do. Ryan stood and began pacing, his mind clearly working through possibilities. Tomorrow, I am going to talk to Sheriff Barnes. He is a good man, and more importantly, he has seen enough of life to understand that the law is not always just. If I can convince him of your situation, he might be willing to slow down the marshal's investigation, buy us some time. Time for what? Time to gather evidence that supports your version of events. Were there any witnesses to your husband's violence? Anyone who saw your bruises, who could testify to what he did to you? Lorelei thought back to those terrible months in Oregon. There was a neighbor woman, Mrs. Patterson. She saw bruises on my arms once when I was hanging laundry. She asked about them and I lied, said I had fallen, but she looked at me like she did not believe me. That is something. Anyone else? The doctor who set my ribs after my husband pushed me down the stairs. I told him I had tripped, but he seemed skeptical, and there was a shopkeeper in town who saw my black eye once. I tried to hide it with powder, but she noticed. Good. That is good. We can contact these people, ask them to provide statements about what they saw. It will not prove what happened that night, but it will establish a pattern of abuse. Even if they agree to help, even if they provide statements, it might not be enough. I still killed him. I still ran. Lorelei's voice was thick with despair. Ryan knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. Look at me. We are going to get through this. I do not care if I have to ride all the way to Oregon myself and drag those witnesses back here. I do not care if I have to stand in front of a judge and argue your case for hours. You are going to be free, Lorelei, truly free. Not running, not hiding, but free. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that freedom was possible, that she could ever truly escape the shadow of what had happened. But years of pain and fear had taught her that hope was dangerous. Still, looking into Ryan's eyes, feeling the warmth of his hands around hers, she found herself wanting to try, wanting to believe that maybe, just this once, things could work out. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Why do you care so much?" He smiled, that gentle smile that made her heart ache. "Because I am in love with you, Lorelei Winters. I think I have been since the moment I caught you on the street that first day. And when you love someone, you fight for them, no matter what." Tears spilled down her cheeks. No one had ever fought for her before. No one had ever stood beside her and promised to weather the storm. It was overwhelming and terrifying, and the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I do not know how to let someone care for me. My husband destroyed any trust I had. We will figure it out together, one day at a time. Right now, all you need to do is trust me enough to let me help. Can you do that?" Lorelei nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Ryan stood and pulled her to her feet, then wrapped her in another embrace. She let herself sink into it, let herself accept the comfort he offered. For the first time since that terrible night in Oregon, she did not feel completely alone. The next day, Ryan rode into town early and spent several hours closeted with Sheriff Barnes. Lorelei waited at the boarding house, too anxious to work, too frightened to do anything but pace her small room. Widow Morrison brought her tea and sat with her, offering silent support. When Ryan finally returned in the late afternoon, his expression was grim but not defeated. "Barnes is willing to help, but it is complicated. The marshal has the authority to arrest you if he can prove you are Lorelei Hayes. What Barnes can do is insist on holding you here in Winnetka rather than turning you over immediately, giving us time to mount a proper defense. So I am going to be arrested, probably, but not convicted. I have sent telegrams to Portland, to the addresses you gave me for the doctor and the shopkeeper and Mrs. Patterson. I am asking them to send sworn statements about what they witnessed. I have also contacted a lawyer in San Francisco who specializes in difficult cases. He is willing to travel here if necessary." Lorelei sank into a chair. "This is going to cost so much money, money I do not have. Let me worry about that." Ryan crouched beside her. "The Double J is doing well. We can afford it. I cannot ask you to spend your family's money on me." "You are not asking. I am offering. And my family agrees with me, by the way. I told them your story last night, and every single one of them said we need to help you. My mother especially. She said any woman in your situation deserves support and protection." The kindness of strangers, of Ryan's family who had never even met her, brought fresh tears to Lorelei's eyes. "I do not understand why everyone is being so good to me. Because you deserve goodness, Lorelei, even if you cannot see it yet." Ryan took her hand. "The marshal is still in town, still asking questions. It is only a matter of time before he makes the connection. When he does, when he comes to arrest you, do not fight it. Let them take you to the jail. Sheriff Barnes will make sure you are treated fairly, and I will be working on your defense every moment. I am scared." It was the most honest thing she had said in months. "I know, but you are also one of the bravest people I have ever met. You survived something that would have broken most people. You are going to survive this too." 2 days later, the marshal knocked on the door of Widow Morrison's boarding house. Lorelei heard his heavy footsteps on the stairs and knew that her time had run out. She stood in the center of her room, hands clasped tightly in front of her, as he entered with Sheriff Barnes behind him. Lorelei Hayes, I am Marshal Thomas Garrett, and I am arresting you for the murder of Samuel Hayes in Portland, Oregon. You need to come with me now." She nodded, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I understand." Sheriff Barnes stepped forward, his weathered face kind. "I will be transporting you to our jail here in Winnetka, Miss Winters. Or Miss Hayes, I suppose. You will be held there while we sort out the legal aspects of this situation. You have my word that you will be treated with respect and dignity." "Thank you, Sheriff." The marshal looked irritated by this exchange, but he did not argue. He put handcuffs on Lorelei's wrists, the cold metal biting into her skin. As they led her down the stairs and out onto the street, she kept her head high. Half the town seemed to have gathered to watch, drawn by the spectacle of an arrest. She saw Mr. Chen standing outside his hotel, his expression sympathetic. Saw Widow Morrison on the boarding house porch, tears streaming down her face, and she saw Ryan, standing beside his horse in front of the general store. Their eyes met across the distance, and he nodded once, a gesture of reassurance and promise. He would keep fighting for her. She was not alone. The jail was a small building at the edge of town with only 2 cells. Sheriff Barnes led her into one and removed the handcuffs before closing the barred door. "I am sorry about this, Miss Winters, but it is the law. I understand. And Sheriff, thank you for believing me, for giving me a chance. Ryan Jacoby is a good judge of character. If he trusts you, that is enough for me." The sheriff tipped his hat and left, leaving her alone in the cell. Lorelei sat on the narrow cot and looked around her new accommodations. The cell was clean but sparse, with just the cot, a bucket, and a tiny barred window high on the wall. It was better than she had feared, but the reality of her situation still pressed down on her like a physical weight. She was in jail, awaiting trial for murder. Everything she had run from had caught up with her. But as she sat there in the dimming afternoon light, she realized something had changed. She was not running anymore. She was not hiding behind lies and false names. She was facing what had happened, facing the consequences of her survival. And somehow, despite the fear, that felt like a kind of freedom in itself. The days in jail passed slowly. Sheriff Barnes brought her meals 3 times a day and allowed visitors. Widow Morrison came daily, bringing books and kind words. Mr. Chen visited once, pressing a small bag of tea into her hands and telling her in his careful English that she had been a good employee, and he hoped to see her back at the hotel soon. But it was Ryan who came most often, usually in the evenings after he had finished work at the ranch. He would pull up a chair outside the cell and they would talk for hours. He told her about the ranch, about his siblings, about his plans for the future. She told him about her childhood in Boston, about her parents who had died when she was 16, about the dreams she had once had before they were crushed by her marriage. "What did you want to be?" Ryan asked one evening. "Before everything happened, what did you dream about?" Lorelei smiled at the memory. "I wanted to be a teacher. I loved reading, loved learning. I thought about opening a small school, maybe teaching children in a frontier town somewhere. It seemed like such an adventure. It is not too late for that dream, you know. Winnetka does not have a proper school yet. The children learn at home or from the minister when he has time. A real teacher would be welcomed. That is assuming I am free to stay in Winnetka, assuming I am not hanged or sent to prison. You are going to be free." Ryan's voice was firm. "The statements are starting to come in. Mrs. Patterson wrote about how frightened you always seemed, how she often heard shouting coming from your cabin. The doctor confirmed that he treated you for broken ribs and suspected domestic violence. Even the shopkeeper sent a statement about your injuries. But that still does not prove what happened that night. That still does not prove I was defending myself rather than just attacking him. It establishes reasonable doubt. It shows that you had reason to fear for your life. That has to count for something. Lorelei wanted to believe him, but she had learned not to trust in justice, not to hope for fairness from a world that had shown her precious little of either. One evening, about 3 weeks into her incarceration, Ryan arrived with particularly good news. The lawyer from San Francisco is here. His name is Marcus Whitmore, and he is the best defense attorney in California. He wants to meet with you tomorrow to discuss strategy. Marcus Whitmore turned out to be a thin, intense man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. He spent 3 hours with Lorelei in the jail, asking detailed questions about her marriage, about that final night, about everything that had led to her husband's death. He listened without judgment, taking copious notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When she finished, he sat back and regarded her thoughtfully. "Miss Hayes, your case is complicated. There is no question that you killed your husband. The question is whether that killing was justified. Unfortunately, the law in most places does not look kindly on women who fight back against their husbands. There is a prevailing belief that a woman's place is to submit, to endure. So I have no chance." Lorelei's heart sank. "I did not say that." Whitmore's expression softened slightly. "What I said is that it will be complicated, but we have several factors working in our favor. First, we have multiple witnesses attesting to your husband's violent nature. Second, we have medical evidence of injuries he inflicted on you. Third, and most importantly, we have the fact that you are alive. His hands were around your throat, Miss Hayes. Another few moments and you would have been the one in the ground. Will a jury see it that way? That depends on the jury. Which is why I am going to file a motion to have your trial held here in Winnetka rather than extraditing you to Oregon. The people here know you. They have seen you work hard, contribute to the community, conduct yourself with dignity. They are more likely to sympathize with your situation than strangers in Portland who only knew your husband." Hope flickered in Lorelei's chest, fragile as a candle flame. "Can you do that? Can you really keep me here?" "I can certainly try. Marshal Garrett will fight it, of course. He wants to take you back to Oregon where the crime occurred. But I have some connections, some favors I can call in. We might be able to make this work." Over the next month, legal maneuvering took place that Lorelei barely understood. Papers were filed, motions argued, telegrams sent back and forth between California and Oregon. Through it all, Ryan remained her constant support, visiting every evening, bringing her news and encouragement. "My mother wants to meet you," he said one night. "She has asked if she can visit tomorrow." Lorelei felt a flutter of nervousness. "Your mother knows about me, about what I did. She knows everything. And she wants you to know that you have the support of the Jacoby family, whatever happens." The next day, a handsome woman in her 50s arrived at the jail. Margaret Jacoby had Ryan's blue eyes and the same gentle strength in her bearing. She sat outside the cell and took Lorelei's hand through the bars. "My dear child," she said, her voice warm with compassion, "I am so sorry for everything you have endured. No woman should ever have to suffer what you suffered. Mrs. Jacoby, I appreciate your kindness, but I do not want to bring trouble to your family. Ryan has already done so much. Ryan is doing exactly what he should do. He is standing up for someone he cares about, someone who deserves justice. We raised our children to recognize right from wrong, and what happened to you was deeply wrong." Margaret squeezed her hand. "I want you to know that when this is over, when you are free, you will always have a place at the Double J. You will always have family." The words broke something loose in Lorelei's chest, and she found herself crying, great heaving sobs that she could not control. Margaret reached through the bars and held her as best she could, murmuring soothing words, offering the maternal comfort Lorelei had been without for so long. In early December, Marcus Whitmore arrived with news that changed everything. "I have convinced the territorial judge to hold your trial here in Winnetka. The arguments about community ties and fair representation won out. Marshal Garrett is furious, but there is nothing he can do about it. Your trial will begin in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days to prepare for the moment that would determine the rest of her life." Lorelei felt paralyzed by the knowledge, but Whitmore and Ryan threw themselves into preparation with ferocious dedication. They tracked down additional witnesses, prepared her testimony, and worked to build a case that would convince a jury that she had acted in self-defense. The day before the trial, Ryan came to the jail with something in his hands. It was a dress, simple but beautiful, made of deep blue fabric that would bring out her eyes. "My mother made this for you. She thought you should have something nice to wear to court, something that makes you feel strong." Lorelei touched the soft fabric, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness. "I do not know how I will ever repay all of you for your kindness." "There is nothing to repay. This is what people do for each other when they care." Ryan reached through the bars and took her hand. "Tomorrow is going to be hard. You are going to have to stand up in front of a room full of people and tell them things you have never wanted to speak about. But I am going to be right there, and so will everyone else who believes in you. You are not alone, Lorelei. Not anymore." That night, Lorelei barely slept. She lay on the hard cot and stared at the ceiling, rehearsing her testimony in her mind, trying to prepare herself for the ordeal ahead. But beneath the fear was something else, something she had not felt in a very long time. It was the tiny, fragile seed of hope. The makeshift courtroom was set up in the town hall, the largest building in Winnetka. When Sheriff Barnes escorted Lorelei inside the next morning, she was stunned to see how many people had come. The benches were packed with townspeople, many of whom she recognized from her months living here. Widow Morrison sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The Jacoby family occupied an entire bench, Ryan and his mother at the center. The judge, a stern-looking man named Judge Harrison who had traveled from Sacramento, called the court to order. The prosecution, led by a local attorney named Daniel Foster who had been appointed by the state, laid out their case. They argued that Lorelei had murdered her husband in cold blood and then fled to avoid justice. Marshal Garrett testified about finding Samuel Hayes' body and tracking Lorelei to California. It was damning testimony, made worse by the clinical way it was presented, stripping away all context and nuance. Then it was the defense's turn. Marcus Whitmore called witness after witness to the stand. Mrs. Patterson spoke about the bruises she had seen, the fear in Lorelei's eyes, the shouting she had heard coming from the Hayes cabin. The doctor testified about treating Lorelei for broken ribs, about his suspicions that she was being abused. The shopkeeper described seeing Lorelei with a black eye and swollen lip, how she had tried to hide the injuries with powder. But the most powerful testimony came from Lorelei herself. Whitmore called her to the stand and gently led her through her story. She told the courtroom everything, holding nothing back. She described her husband's courtship, how charming he had seemed before they married. She described the first time he hit her, 2 weeks after their wedding, and how shocked and ashamed she had felt. She described months of escalating violence, of living in constant fear, of being isolated and alone with no one to help her. And then she described that final night. Her voice shook as she recounted coming home to find her husband drunk and enraged. She described the beating, worse than any before, and finally his hands around her throat, squeezing the life from her. "I could not breathe," she said, tears streaming down her face. "The world was going dark. I knew that if I did not do something, I was going to die." So I grabbed the fireplace poker. I did not think about it. I just acted on pure instinct, and I hit him as hard as I could." "What happened then?" Whitmore asked gently. "He let go. He fell. And suddenly I could breathe again. I checked for a pulse, but there was nothing. He was dead, and I had killed him." She looked up at the jury, meeting their eyes one by one. "I know that what I did was wrong. Taking a life is always wrong, but I did not want to die. I want to live, and that was the only way." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even Judge Harrison looked moved, though he maintained his stern expression. The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal. Daniel Foster tried to paint her as a liar, a manipulator who had planned her husband's murder, and then concocted a story about abuse to cover her tracks. He pointed out that she had run rather than going to the authorities, suggesting that proved her guilt. He questioned why she had not simply left her husband if he was truly so dangerous, but Lorelei held firm. She answered each question honestly, even when the answers were painful. When Foster asked why she had not left, she looked him in the eye and said, "Because I had nowhere to go. No money, no family, no friends who could help me. And because I knew he would follow me. He told me many times that if I ever tried to leave, he would kill me. I believed him." The trial lasted 3 days. On the final day, both sides gave their closing arguments. Foster argued that murder was murder, regardless of the circumstances, and that Lorelei should be held accountable for taking a life. Whitmore countered with a passionate speech about justice, about the right to self-defense, about how the law should protect victims rather than punish them for surviving. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Whitmore said, his voice ringing through the courtroom, "you have heard the evidence. You have heard about the years of abuse Lorelei Hayes endured. You have heard about the night her husband tried to strangle her to death. And you have heard how she fought back with the only option available to her. This is not a murder trial. This is a question of whether a woman has the right to defend her own life. I submit to you that she does. I submit that Lorelei Hayes is not a criminal. She is a survivor, and she deserves her freedom." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Lorelei waited in a small room off the courtroom, flanked by Sheriff Barnes. Ryan had wanted to stay with her, but it was not permitted. She sat in silence, her hands clasped in her lap, praying to a God she was not sure she believed in anymore. When the jury finally returned, Lorelei was escorted back into the courtroom. The foreman, a weathered rancher named Jacob Mills, stood and faced the judge. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Harrison asked. "We have, Your Honor." "What say you?" "We find the defendant, Lorelei Hayes, not guilty by reason of self-defense." The courtroom erupted. People cheered and applauded while Judge Harrison banged his gavel for order. Lorelei sat frozen, unable to process what she had just heard. Not guilty. Free. Marcus Whitmore was grinning beside her. "You are free, Miss Hayes. Truly free." And then Ryan was there, having pushed through the crowd. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her tight while she cried. They were not tears of sorrow this time, but of relief, of joy, of the overwhelming emotion of a burden finally lifted. "I told you," Ryan murmured against her hair. "I told you that you would be free." The celebration that followed was unlike anything Lorelei had ever experienced. Half the town seemed to converge on her, offering congratulations and support. Widow Morrison hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. Mr. Chen shook her hand formally and told her she was welcome back at the hotel anytime. Margaret Jacoby embraced her like a daughter, whispering that she was so proud of her courage. But it was Ryan who stayed by her side through it all, his hand never leaving hers. When they finally managed to escape the crowd and step outside into the cool December evening, Lorelei took her first breath as a free woman. The air tasted sweeter than she remembered. "I cannot believe it is over," she said softly. "I cannot believe I am really free." "You are." Ryan turned to face her, both of his hands holding hers now. "No more running. No more hiding. You can be yourself now, Lorelei, whoever you want to be." She looked up at him, this man who had stood by her when she had given him every reason to walk away. This man who had believed in her when she had not believed in herself. This man who had told her he loved her and then proved it with every action. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I should have said weeks ago." "What is that?" "I love you, Ryan Jacoby. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you caught me on the street. And I have been fighting it ever since because I did not think I deserved to be loved, did not think I could ever be free enough to love someone back. But I do love you, with everything I am." Ryan's face lit up with a joy so pure it took her breath away. "Say that again." "I love you." He kissed her then, right there on the street with half of Winnetka watching. It was Lorelei's first kiss since her husband had died, and it was nothing like the brutal, possessive kisses she had endured in her marriage. This was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was the kiss of a man who cherished her, who would never hurt her, who saw her as an equal and a partner. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Ryan said, "Marry me." Lorelei laughed, giddy with happiness and freedom. "Is that a question or a demand?" "It is a question. A very heartfelt question from a man who loves you more than anything in this world." "Will you marry me, Lorelei? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you what love should really be?" She wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to say yes, but old fears died hard. "I do not know if I can do that again. Marriage, I mean. The thought of being someone's wife after everything that happened. I do not know if I am strong enough." Ryan cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "Then do not think of it as being my wife in the way you understand that word. Think of it as being my partner, my equal, my best friend who I happen to love desperately. We will figure out what marriage means for us together. And I promise you, Lorelei, I will spend every day of our lives making sure you feel safe and loved and free." Something in his words, in his eyes, in the absolute sincerity of his promise, reached past her fear and found the part of her that still believed in hope, that still believed in love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Ryan swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and this time Lorelei kissed him back with all the love and hope and gratitude that filled her heart. They were married 2 weeks later, on Christmas Day, 1878, in a simple ceremony at the church in Winnetka. Lorelei wore a dress that Margaret had made for her, white with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Ryan wore his best suit, looking so handsome it made her heart ache. The entire town attended, cramming into the small church to witness the union of two people who had found each other against all odds. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the marriage, Marshal Garrett, who was still in town finishing up paperwork, stood up. Lorelei's heart stopped. But then the marshal said, "I object to the fact that it took this long. These two should have been married weeks ago." The church erupted in laughter, and even Lorelei had to smile. They moved into the ranch house at the Double J, where Ryan's family welcomed her with open arms. His brothers treated her like the sister they had never had. His actual sister became her closest friend. And Margaret became the mother Lorelei had lost so many years ago, offering wisdom and love in equal measure. Life at the ranch was hard work, but it was honest work. Lorelei helped with the household tasks, learned to ride a horse, and discovered that she was actually quite good at managing the ranch's finances. She also began teaching the children of nearby ranches, fulfilling that old dream of becoming a teacher. 3 times a week, children would gather in the ranch house parlor, and Lorelei would teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic. But the best part of her new life was Ryan. He was patient as she learned to trust again, never pushing her further than she was ready to go. He held her on the nights when nightmares dragged her back to Oregon, to her dead husband's face. He celebrated with her on the good days, when she realized hours had passed without thinking about the past. He showed her, day by day, what real love looked like. One evening in early spring, they sat together on the porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lorelei rested her head on Ryan's shoulder, feeling more at peace than she ever had in her life. "You remember what you said to me the night I told you everything?" she asked. "The night I confessed about my husband, I remember." His arm tightened around her shoulders. "You said I was going to be free, truly free. I did not believe you then, but you were right. I am free now. Free from the past, free from fear, free to be myself and to love you. I never thought I would feel this way again." Ryan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You deserve all the freedom in the world, Lorelei. You deserve all the happiness. And I am going to spend the rest of our lives making sure you have both." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, punctuated by the occasional lowing of cattle and the chirp of crickets. This was home now, Lorelei realized. Not a place she was running to or hiding in, but a real home where she belonged. "I want to tell you something else," she said after a while. "I think I might be pregnant." She felt Ryan's body go still, then he pulled back to look at her, his eyes wide. "Really? You think so?" "I am late and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. I'm not certain yet, but I think it is possible." A smile spread across his face, slow and wondering. "A baby, our baby." Then his expression grew serious. "How do you feel about that, after everything you went through?" It was a fair question. Her first marriage had been so terrible that the thought of bringing a child into it had been horrifying. But this was different. This was a child born of love who would grow up surrounded by family and safety. "I feel happy," she said honestly. "A little scared, but mostly happy. This baby will have the childhood I want to give them, the kind I wished I could have had. They will grow up knowing they are loved and safe." Ryan kissed her then, tender and sweet. "They will have the best mother in the world. And I promise, Lorelei, I will be the father they deserve. I will protect this child and you with everything I have." She believed him. That was the miracle of her new life, the ability to trust again, to believe in promises and hope for the future. Their first child, a son they named Thomas Ryan Jacoby, was born in late November of 1879. The birth was difficult, attended by the doctor from town and Margaret, but when Lorelei finally held her baby in her arms, she wept with joy. He was perfect, with Ryan's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair, and he was hers. Theirs. Ryan was a devoted father from the first moment. He would hold Thomas for hours, rocking him and singing soft lullabies. He changed diapers and walked the floor during midnight crying sessions, never complaining, always patient. Watching him with their son, Lorelei fell in love with him all over again. 2 years later, their daughter arrived. They named her Margaret Rose after Ryan's mother and Lorelei's mother. Maggie, as they called her, was a firecracker from the beginning, loud and demanding and utterly charming. Thomas adored his baby sister, following her around from the moment she could crawl and appointing himself her protector. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The Double J Ranch prospered under the combined efforts of the Jacoby family. Lorelei's little school grew, eventually moving to a proper schoolhouse that the town built specifically for her classes. She became known throughout the region as an excellent teacher, and children would travel from miles around to attend her school, but her greatest joy remained her family. Thomas grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Maggie was wild and adventurous, always getting into scrapes that her father patiently extracted her from. And in 1884, another son arrived, Samuel James, named after Lorelei's father and Ryan's father. Sam was quieter than his siblings, content to observe the world around him with serious gray eyes. Through it all, Lorelei and Ryan's love only deepened. They faced challenges together, from droughts that threatened the ranch to illnesses that scared them half to death to the ordinary struggles of raising a family. But they faced everything side by side, partners in every sense of the word. On their 10th anniversary, Ryan took Lorelei on a picnic to a spot overlooking the ranch. They sat together on a blanket, watching their children play in the distance, Thomas carefully watching over Maggie and Sam. "You ever think about Oregon?" Ryan asked. It was a question he had never asked before, respecting her right to leave the past buried. Lorelei considered it. "Sometimes, but not the way I used to. I used to think about it with fear and shame. Now, when I think about it, I think about how it led me here. How the worst thing that ever happened to me brought me to the best thing that ever happened to me. You. No regrets, not a single one. Well, maybe one. I wish I had met you first before everything with Samuel. I wish my first marriage could have been to you." Ryan took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Then think of it this way. That marriage is over. That life is over. This is your first real marriage to someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. This is your real life, Lorelei." She smiled, leaning against him. "You are right. This is my real life, and it is better than anything I ever dreamed possible." As they sat there, watching their children play under the California sun, Lorelei thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and fear, the desperate flight across half the country, the terror of facing trial and possible execution. The moment when she had confessed her darkest secret to Ryan and waited for him to turn away. But instead of turning away, he had held her closer. He had promised her freedom, and he had kept that promise. More than that, he had given her love, family, and a future she never thought she could have. That night in Oregon, when she had grabbed the fireplace poker in a last desperate bid for survival, she could never have imagined this. Could never have imagined sitting in the sunshine with a man who cherished her, watching children who were safe and loved and free. Could never have imagined being truly, completely happy, but here she was, free from her past, free from fear, free to love and be loved. It had taken a journey through darkness to reach the light, but she had made it. She was home. Years continued to pass, each one adding new layers to the rich tapestry of Lorelei's life. Thomas grew into a serious young man who surprised everyone by deciding to become a lawyer, inspired by Marcus Whitmore, who had become something of a mentor to him. Maggie became an accomplished horsewoman and eventually took over much of the ranch management, proving herself as capable as any man. And Sam discovered a talent for teaching, often helping his mother at the school. In 1895, when Lorelei was 39 years old, Thomas married a kind young woman named Elizabeth, and a year later, Lorelei became a grandmother. Holding her first grandchild, a little girl named Lorelei Ann, she was overcome with emotion. This child would grow up in a world where she was loved and protected. She would never know the fear that had defined so much of Lorelei's early life. That felt like the ultimate victory. Ryan, now in his early 40s with silver threading through his dark hair, held his wife close as they watched their son with his new family. "We did good, did we not? We did very good." Lorelei reached up and kissed his cheek. "Thank you, Ryan, for everything. For believing in me when I could not believe in myself. for fighting for me, for loving me. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes still as clear and steady as they had been the day they met. "You know what I realized the other day? It has been 17 years since you arrived in Winnetka. 17 years since I caught you on the street and thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. I was a mess that day, terrified and exhausted and running from everything. You were brave. You are still brave. And you are even more beautiful now than you were then." They stood together, surrounded by their family, by the life they had built together. And Lorelei realized that she had finally, completely let go of the past. She was no longer defined by what had happened to her, but by what she had overcome, by the love she had found, by the family she had created. That night, when they were alone in their bedroom, the house quiet around them, Ryan held Lorelei close. She rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and felt completely, utterly at peace. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too. Always have, always will." Outside, the California stars shone bright over the Double J Ranch. Inside, Lorelei drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who had saved her, not by rescuing her, but by standing beside her while she saved herself. The man who had heard her darkest secret and held her closer, promising freedom. The man who had kept every promise he had ever made. She had traveled so far from that terrified woman who stepped off the stage in Winnetka all those years ago. Had traveled from darkness into light, from fear into love, from running into staying. And every step of that journey had been worth it to end up here, in this life, with this man, in this family. As sleep claimed her, Lorelei smiled. She was free, truly, completely, wonderfully free. And tomorrow, she would wake up and live another day of this beautiful life, this life she had fought so hard to claim. This life that was, finally, truly hers. The story that had begun with blood and terror had ended with love and peace. And in the quiet of that night, with her husband's arms around her and her family sleeping safely under the same roof, Lorelei knew that she had found what she had been searching for all along. Not just freedom from her past, but freedom to embrace her future. Not just survival, but a life worth living. And it was more than enough. It was everything.